In November 2018, during the midterm elections, the Democratic Party won a number of seats and took back control of the House of Representatives. This has given them the power of launching an impeachment inquiry or actually invoking impeachment itself. The sequence of events that have brought us here it's actually kind of multifaceted. There's been an ongoing concern with President Trump's relationship with his own business. Usually when presidents own a business before they go into office, there's an expectation that they'll put it into a blind trust. That's basically where you get a kind of trusted person to mind your business while you're in office, so there's no sense that you could be doing something as president that would lead to your personal enrichment. President Trump hasn't done that. What he's done is handed over control of his business to his kids, and mainly his two older sons, Don Jr. and Eric. And there's been a lot of concern that some of his actions in office have led to him making money through his businesses because he's president. So that includes diplomats from other countries coming into Washington, D.C. and deciding to stay in the Trump Hotel. That includes Air Force personnel booking stays at his resorts in Scotland, for example, which happened quite recently. So this is what we might consider to be a violation of the emoluments clause. This was introduced a long time ago because they were concerned that people might get a nice painting from the French government and then act in a way that's favorable to the French, not necessarily taking into consideration what would be best for the United States. That's not actually what's driven these impeachment hearings. What seems to be the major driving force is a conversation that President Trump had with Ukrainian President Zelensky, a few weeks ago, where there seems to be an implication that he asked the Ukraine to look into the activities of Joe Biden's son Hunter when he was involved with a Ukrainian company. And there was a whistleblower involved in this. Now what that means is that somebody with access to information about the conversation has reported it to the proper authorities, in this case Congress, and has said that they think that President Trump is in some way seeking foreign assistance in the 2020 election, because at the time Joe Biden was leading in all the polls for the Democratic nomination. So following on from that, there have been a number of other revelations. President Trump actually on camera said that China should look into Joe Biden, which hasn't helped his case. Some of his defenders are saying that he was joking, but whether or not he was remains to be seen, and whether or not that has led to China actually looking into Joe Biden as well, that would again be problematic. So what's going on with the hearings right now is they're trying to gather background information. If they gather information that suggests that President Trump has committed an impeachable offense, and these are fairly broadly defined high crimes, treason, high misdemeanors, if they believe that there's enough evidence that he did that, what they'll do is they'll actually pass articles of impeachment. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, would pass the articles of impeachment. There would be a vote in the House. You only need a simple majority, so 50% plus one. The Democrats have more than 50% of the seats in the House of Representatives, so even if the vote goes on party lines, that should pass. It then goes to the Senate, and the Senate acts as essentially the court for an impeachment trial. Now, when President Clinton was impeached during the 90s, the allegations against him were obstruction of justice and lying under oath. The case got to the Senate, and in both cases they voted against impeaching him. That vote didn't exactly go on party lines. Predominantly the Democrats were on the president's side, but a few Republicans actually voted for Clinton as well. One of the interesting things about the Clinton impeachment case is that it was the first time in the modern era that we've seen an impeachment. You have to go back to Andrew Johnson to find a president who was going through the impeachment process before that. Although President Nixon was more or less where President Trump is now, they didn't actually get to impeachment because Nixon resigned. There was a strong sense that he was both going to be impeached by the House and the Senate and therefore removed from office. Once it gets to the Senate really kind of decides how it's going to hold the trial, as it were. And under Clinton, you could see that they were really kind of not exactly making it up as they go, but they were deciding exactly how the process should work at the time, because there really wasn't any useful examples from the past to use. So if this reaches the Senate, it requires a 2/3 majority in the Senate to pass. That's 67 senators. Now, if the vote goes on party lines in the Senate, that's not going to be enough to remove President Trump from office. So you would need almost 20 Republican senators to vote in favor of impeachment in order to have him removed from office. Most political scientists and most people who follow politics would consider that unlikely. It seems fairly likely that most of the Democrats would vote to impeach in the Senate. It seems fairly likely you would get 5 to maybe 10 Republicans, but you wouldn't get enough to remove him. And that would mean that President Trump wouldn't actually be removed from office. So there's a sense developing that because it's improbable he'll be removed, why bother? Now, from the perspective of the Democrats, it's actually very useful for the 2020 election. When we look at public opinion and President Nixon, we see his, if you look at the Gallup polls, for example, like you just Google Gallup presidential approval ratings, you see President Nixon's ratings fall off a cliff as the impeachment hearings started, because the public were aware of all of these things that he was alleged to have done. For the most part, they didn't really know, they didn't have full information. And there's evidence from that this could really help the Democrats next year with the presidential election, with a third of the Senate and the entire House up for re-election. So there's a lot of things going on all at once here.